Hello and welcome to Podsongs, where we interview inspirational people in service to others as inspiration for a new song. Today, my guest is the acclaimed musician, Peter Mulvey, and his guest is the poet, Naomi Shehab Nye.
Jack,
Mr. Mulvey,
how are you?
I'm great, mate. How you doing?
Oh, great. Uh, got back from a run of shows yesterday and about 1 in the morning, 1:30, and then was up with the baby. That's life.
Well, are you ever home? You're like
Mm.
always on the road.
No, I'm mostly home these days, which is pretty beautiful because my kid came along a year and a half ago, and it was still the middle of the pandemic. And then
Mm,
when I went back out, I'm lucky after 30 years of touring, I can just play Thursday through Sunday, maybe 3 times a month and make that work. So I'm actually,
mm.
most of what I do is just wrangle a child.
God Wrangler, yeah. You're in a good
Which,
location there. No, you can do these. You can nip out for a quick tour
yeah,
and come back. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Okay, good. Have we got Naomi or
No, she comes in half an hour. So this is the preamble. This
no?
is the Peter part.
Oh, great. Let
So
me.
yeah, we go deep into understanding you, your life
Mm,
story in half an hour,
yeah, as
and
you do.
why you want to interview Naomi of all the people in all the world, and
Yeah.
yeah,
All right. Well, uh, yeah, there it is. Launch in. Lay my soul bare.
yeah. Well, I've been listening to your stuff, and it's you're such an accomplice. Let me just lay it on thick first, because I've got to big up my guests, and I think it's in my world. I come from the singer songwriter world, and
Yeah.
yeah, you're usually good at one thing. Though you're good at vocal, you got a lovely voice, or you're a great lyricist, or you're a very virtuoso guitarist. But you've got everything. You've got the fretwork, the lyrics, the voice. You're just this complete package rolled into one.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, I think it probably just comes from being, in my 50s. Like, when I was in my 20s, I wanted to be one of those guitar heroes. Like I listened to Leo Kottke or Michael Hutchins and y- and then you dive in and if, if you've got some talent and if you've got the willing to be obsessive, you will develop some chops. But
Yeah.
if you have like a good aesthetic, then you will have that embarrassing thing where you're like, oh, I guess I'm never going to be him. Like that,
Mm.
I'm just not going to have that. And so then you sort of despair and then you dive into like, oh, I'm going to be a singer and I'm going to have, this high tenor voice. And then you're like, oh, that's also not going to happen. And then the writing, that's the thing I like about writing is that's the one skill that you can keep transcending whatever
Right. Right.
born with. Like you can
Mm.
always say something better, usually by removing a word.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. Well, that's you must always push in the boundaries because I saw you do this TED talk where you just put the iPhone there playing airplane sounds and with a
Yeah.
guitar, and then you just read a beautiful letter over the top of it. So you're mixing up. You're not satisfied with the genre. Is that what's kept you going through 19 albums?
I think it is. I I am really curious about a number of things. And some of them are not very pleasant.
Hmm.
Like um I'm kind of a little bit obsessed with our politics. Like
Oh,
no
that'll give you a headache. Oh,
oh
why?
yes. But
Oh,
well, because there's this sort of counterintuitive thing to democracy where, you what I think it was Norman Mailer, and I'm not going to get the quote right, but Norman Mailer said, let the desires and hatreds and wants and needs and loves and cupidities, I had to look
mm,
that up, and quirks uh, of every man and woman have their say, and the world will be better off because in the end, there is more good than bad in the sum of us.
mm.
that's really elegant.
Mm.
I don't know if that's true, but I do know that you watch people argue with each other and you want to throw up your hands, but then you ask yourself, if I were gay, if I were black, if I were living life in a wheelchair, if I were a woman, if I were if I were poor,
Yeah.
if I
Yeah.
lived in poverty, would I rather live in poverty now or in 1810? And the answer is now,
Mm.
uh, you know, we like we it seems to me that our politics, democracy itself kind of lifts us up, even though most of what is going on is frankly just a bunch of tiresome middle-aged men like me arguing too much, and needing to be right, like
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
the very venality of politicians. And so I'm circling back to like why I'm so restless artistically and I take on so many topics. I guess they're all just human languages. Our languages are startling because when we sort of lay bare all of ourselves, there's our shadow side is right there with it. And yet somehow I'd rather be born now, and anyone would rather be born now. The world is becoming a more humane place.
Mm. Well, you wouldn't believe that if you watch the news, though. I saw you.
Mhm. Yes,
I
exactly.
s-
Yeah.
I
Go
saw you.
ahead.
You shared this great video of Jon Stewart. He has this series called The Problem now, and he was talking
Yeah.
about gun rights, and so he's tackling. He's using his comedy in the way that you use your music to go with these issues that he thinks. I guess he wants them to be solved. Uh,
Yeah, or at least to cast some light upon them.
mm,
Oh, that's great. I'm sitting here thinking you're asking me these questions, and I'm thinking of all the questions I'm going to ask Naomi when she gets here. I, really, I appreciate this. Right. I think he wants to cast light, and that's the best that rhetoric can do. And then humor casts some warmth. And he
mm,
used humor the way I use music.
with
Like,
warmth, yeah, yeah.
yeah, exactly. Like insight and compassion, I think is what the Buddhists would say, or just frankly, light and warmth.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, and you had that song, that you wrote, and Annie DiFranco and many other people covered it as well, and,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
that was a great moment, no?
Uh, I still remember this, and I think that was 8 years ago.
Mm,
Now, a young white supremacist walked into a church down in Charleston, South Carolina, and murdered, 9 parishioners. And I remember we spent 2 days talking about it because I was on the road opening shows for Ani. And the thing that I couldn't stand, like I couldn't take it, was that one of the people that he murdered was an 87-year-old woman named Susie Jackson. And I just thought, I still, I I can't accept it. Like once
mm,
you've lived 87 years old, even if you're an awful pain in the ass of a human being, right? You're 87, you deserve at that point in your life to have your children and your grandchildren around you and worrying about you and hoping you stop driving, because what's
mm,
coming is so hard. You have to die and let all the people you love sail forward past the time when you are able to do anything to care.
mm,
That's
mm,
like the death of an elderly person, if it happens in the right way, is so personal and so sad, but also so beautiful. Like an elderly person will have given so much love into the world, that we all should just gather the way that we would for a sunset or an eclipse or the birth of a child, like this
mm,
beautiful. And then in the name of ugliness, this guy takes it from her, like from every child she has. So I was so upset. And I wrote a song in like 6 minutes called Take Down Your Flag because, you know, not only had this ugliness happened, but the battle flag of the Confederacy was flying over the state capitol there. The very symbol of the ugliness that took her out of the natural order of things, took Susie Jackson away from her family. And so, it was just an exhortation to take the flag down. And I mentioned Susie Jackson in the middle verse, and then I came off stage, and Ani DeFranco said, "Teach me the chorus of that song. I want to sing it tomorrow." And then a friend of mine called me that night and said, "Teach me the chords to that song. This is the internet. I want to sing that song the next time I play music." And then someone wrote to me, a friend of mine said, "Are you going to write 8 more verses for the 8 more people who died?" And that was the moment I said, "No, but Ani will. Ani will write a verse for someone, and my friend Ralston will write a verse for someone, my friend Pamela." And I started calling my friends and I said,
Mm.
"Just write a middle verse." And then that happened on the internet, and 200 people wrote their own
Oh,
verses.
wow.
Yeah, it just, I mean, this is rare, I guess, but for one little moment, I actually had written a folk song. Like it
Mm.
wasn't mine. It didn't belong to me. It immediately got changed by other people. And Peter Yarrow from Peter, Paul and Mary, someone gave him my phone number and he called me, and I'm like thinking like, "You wrote Puff the Magic Dragon." And he said something very perceptive. He said, "The thing that is happening now, you didn't make it happen necessarily. It happens by accident,
Mm.
and it will not last more than a moment. So think about what you want to do now, because this will, it'll lose its momentum very soon." That's the
Mm.
way it is. And so I did I think, a predictable white middle class thing. I had a little online benefit concert. So in the end, we could send a few $1,000s down to the Low Country Ministries, which is the sort of the umbrella organization of churches that looks after the community in Charleston, because 9 people are gone from a community that is incredibly hard on their hundreds and hundreds of loved ones, and then the loved ones of those loved ones. And, at least we could do something. But I honestly feel like in some ways, the best thing that came from the song was that many, many people got a chance to grapple artistically with their own feelings of hopelessness and helplessness, and then got to experience that thing of at least giving expression in a community to those feelings, you
Yeah.
know?
That's what I hope to do with this show is to get people involved and keep me artistic, creative for a purpose. And but yeah, it's so heartbreaking. We had an episode on the guns too, and it just seems like an unsolvable thing. It's so heartbreaking if you're involved with that because it keeps coming back and different, the same story but with a different cast.
Yeah. And this is where one of my many artistic inclinations is to zoom my camera way back. And in some ways, I'm a bit of a science nerd. A guy named Steven Pinker wrote a book called The Better Angels of Our Nature. And he pointed out that actually what's happening is that murder is plummeting on the earth. War is plummeting. Like, your chances of being murdered by somebody have gone down something like an order of magnitude every century for the last 8 centuries. Which one, um, my God, can you think how terrifying it must have been to live in
Yeah,
1200?
the Wild
Like,
West. Yeah.
yeah, there's no running water. You're hoping that one of your 6 turnips is like not moldy so that you can eat that until you can find some marrow from a hedgehog or something.
Mm,
And
mm.
then, by the way, barbarians are about to, stave in and you haven't had a shower ever.
You worry a lot about the past, yeah? Like, you're very happy to be here in the here and now.
I think I am. It's so hard to know because, of course, we have material plenty
Mm,
in a way that we never did. And we also have I mean, there are no child chimney sweeps over in your country, and like on and on. It's like
You can't get them. I've tried. It's just,
right. And so, and yet the times we live in also seem deeply alienating.
yeah, lacking in spirituality and,
Yeah.
mm,
Yeah, exactly. Like, my parents are elderly now. And so I'm going through what all us modern people go through, like at what point should they move into assisted living?
mm,
Uh, and they are wondering about it too. And then, I'm trying to raise my kid and, like that whole thing. And at the same, it's amazing that we all have running water to go through these things.
in the
But
background.
why are we not living all under one roof? It would
Mm,
be a giant pain in the ass and we would irritate each other and it would have costs, but I'm not entirely sure that this beautiful modernity that I'm praising so much is better. Like I feel like there are some babies we could retrieve having thrown them out with the bathwater, and start living more communally. And here, I mean, you and I are fortunate that we get to have this talk because of Zoom, but
mhm.
also I'm alone in a room right now, and so are you. And I feel sad for you, Jack.
Thanks,
I feel
thanks.
sad, but
I'm in a
that's
box, yeah.
lonely.
I'm in the south of Italy here, and they have a lot of multi-generational homes here, so the grandparents live in the family, they don't move away, and, I think that's great because they've got so much to give, and they are so useful. So would you consider having your parents back home, or?
Yeah, I would. So I have moved about 1,000 miles from them. America is far too big. I, but my eldest brother is actually considering exactly that thing. His kids have flown the coop. But so here's the question I have for you then. So you live in the south of Italy, and there are multi-generational homes. Do you get the impression that they veered away from that and then veered back toward it? Or was their tradition sturdy enough to withstand the sort of glut of modernity?
Well, it's also the financial aspect. It's much more expensive to put them in a home, and they also they build the houses. They have the land, so they build houses on the land near them for you. You're already building houses for your grandchildren. Uh,
Right.
yeah, and they make great babysitters as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. My wife's parents live not far away, and they're and she's an only, and so they are sort of those turbocharged grandparents who have been waiting quite some time for this one
Ah,
opportunity.
there you go. You lucked out. I'm begging mine to come over more and more. I mean, I don't just because I didn't realize I've got a 9-month-old baby now.
Oh
So
my God.
yeah,
Congratulations. Mine's
thanks.
18. Oh God.
Yeah, so I didn't realize what. I mean, everyone tells you it's going to be tough, but it's not until you're inside the war.
Bolt.
The, and I
Yeah.
shouldn't talk like this, but I'm talking to another guy, so we can talk. We can talk like this, frankly. But if my
Oh,
partner hears, she doesn't like me, say talking in this way. But it's
yes.
because there's a lot of good moments as well.
It
But
is. Okay. I feel like in some ways it's this strange little, especially those first maybe 17-ish weeks,
mhm, mhm.
where they are settling into some kind of a schedule and you never sleep and
Yeah,
that is like an involuntary, mostly beautiful, but utterly consuming psilocybin mushroom trip. Like you like you
mm.
don't get you don't get to plan. You can't remember what happened 3 seconds ago.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And you're just in this continual forward motion. And it's heartbreaking, of
Mm,
course,
mm.
because before it happened, you were a person with plans and an agenda, and then you're overthrown. Like it must be what it's like to join a monastery or go to boot camp and be turned into like a special forces person. Like
Yeah.
whatever that you thought you were is just dashed aside like so much dandelion fluff.
That'll
You
be
know,
easier. I give me boot camp.
I bet, yeah, because the thing about children, they're like these terrifying Zen masters. Like you have to give them
Mhm.
all your attention. And if your
Yeah,
attention
yeah,
to your phone, the
yeah.
baby is immediately erupts into a crisis. And of course, they are almost pure love, which includes, pure love, which includes hunger and wailing and defecation. Like that, all those things are lots of love coming from them. You know what it is? It's joining a cult. You've joined a cult, and the leader of the cult is this beatific being who like beams the pure love of consciousness and light at you, and also doesn't care if he wrecks your life. You know?
Yeah. Oh, I love it when you go down these thought experiments. I've heard you do it in a few videos now. It's great, really good.
Oh, I do it because it eases the sting.
Yeah, you just face the pain. But it is training as well, because I've upped my game in everything. You know, when I have half an hour of my time, I can do the
Yes.
work of 3 men in a week.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's true. My wife and I ran across this cartoon because you remember the advice you got from someone. They said, sleep when the baby sleeps.
Sleep when the baby sleeps, yeah.
But of course you can't do that. You have said, you have half an hour, week's worth of work. So the rejoinder was this cartoon we saw, and it was just a series of illustrations. It said, sleep when the baby sleeps. Cry when the baby cries, vomit when the baby vomits, stare blankly into space when the baby stares.
Yeah.
Listen, you're
I'm still in there. You're 18 months now.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's easy now, and I'm still in the gray zone.
I'm happy to tell you that it's easier, and it's also, it's also just different. Now he's walking around, and the hardest part so far for me is that he's so, they are all babies are so vastly intelligent. And so he knows what it is that he wants, and he can't communicate it. And he gets so frustrated, and you're trying to meet him there, and you try your best to be wide open, but he can't talk to you yet.
Okay.
And then he gets upset. In fact, he hit me. Like he was, and he just like hit me, and he was looking at me like, I need you to see that I'm upset. And I said, no, honey. No, we are gentle. We don't hit. And then he like hugged me, and his version of a hug is that he just puts his head on you. He just puts his head on you, and now you have a head on you, and I thought, I just watched what I hope is the trajectory of the human species, right? Like that's it. Like,
Yeah.
we're only upset when we're afraid. We're only angry when we're afraid. Like if you look underneath anger, it's like a rock. And then there's this bug called fear that always scuttles away. And then, there's only one way out of that. And it's the, hug. Someone needs to give, and I know this sounds trite, but someone needs to give Donald Trump a hug. Someone needs to give Vladimir Putin a hug. I would like to see those hugs happen at The Hague. But
hugging at The Hague. Yeah.
It's hugging at The Hague. The Hague. Oh, you don't need a Hague. You don't need a strong dictator.
All right. Well, let's quickly, because I think Naomi will be here any minute. So,
oh my God.
Let's, why her? Why Naomi Shehab Nye?
It's because I've noticed over the years that the poets have this sort of envy of us singers and songwriters.
Didn't you write a song called The Trouble with Poets?
Yeah, I did. And
hope she's expecting a nice song. Yeah.
Exactly. And we songwriters have this sort of envy of poets. Like I think of poetry as a higher art form than songs. I really do.
Yeah.
And I think poets do too. This is what I want to confront her with. Like, it's harder to make poetry than it is to make a pop song, I think, or even any kind of song. I think poetry is one of the most difficult art forms. But I think I want to find out from her, like, is it that the poets wish that they had that guitar in the song to go out and sort of meet the crowd and the whole livelier thing. Like poetry, I think, has been museumified. So that's what I want to explore. Like, what is it? And perhaps she doesn't in particular envy me at all, like as in her profession, doesn't envy my profession, but I certainly envy hers. So that would be the nub of what I want to get into.
And she followed her poetry for a long time, or?
For a long time. Yes. And I think we met online in that I quoted a line from one of her poems in my sort of monthly email newsletter to flog people to get out to my gigs, and someone sent it to her. And then she reached out to me. And so we sort of have had this back and forth, and I've quoted her poetry in my own songwriting as well. So this will be fun.
Okay.
We're just waiting for her now.
Yeah, I think she's ready to join. She was in the waiting room. So.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
Hi there.
Hey.
Hello.
Hi, Peter. Hi, Jack.
How you doing?
Wait,
Where are you, Peter?
I'm in my home. I'm
Okay.
actually in my house. It makes me so happy. Where are
I
you?
couldn't believe it.
I'm in my house. And
Oh,
Jack, you're in Italy?
I am, yes. Yeah.
Well, thank you for organizing the time frame. That was a challenge and you did a good job.
Yeah, we're all on opposite. Whereabouts? You're on the West
So
Coast, yeah.
I'm in
You're-
Texas.
Oh, you're in Texas.
I'm in South Texas. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Very springy down here. A lot of bluebonnets.
Whereas we have the crocuses just coming up through the snow.
Nice. Wow. You still have snow?
Yes. Yes.
Wow.
I mean, it can snow in April up here. You live down there for a reason, I would imagine.
Exactly. Not because of politics.
Our favorite.
Yeah, right. So good to see you. Well, thanks for inviting me to be part of this.
Thank you.
Yeah. And Peter, I love reading about your updates and all you've been doing and taping and traveling and yeah. It's
Thank
really
you.
amazing. So impressive.
I didn't, like on Jim Harrison's gravestone, supposedly it said he got his work done.
Oh, really?
I don't know if that's true or not, but
Oh, that's interesting.
I do a lot. And then there are times when I wonder if I'm just engaging in the American narcotic of work.
In constant motion.
Right. You got to do more for the shareholders, Peter. You got to write those folk
Right.
tunes and play those folk shows.
Right. Well, it's impressive how much you do.
Thank
And
you.
what is your connection with Jack? Are you just old friends or
New friends.
New friend. Yes. Yeah, Jack, how did you come to reach out to ask me to ask Naomi to be a part of Podsongs? Let's
Well, I
turn
need-
this around.
Who's interviewing me? I never get interviewed. I ask the questions here. Now, Peter's one of the, a pillar of the songwriting community, and so I've asked him for a long time to come on. He finally agreed. So
That's so lovely. Yeah. And do you know, I was really introduced to Peter by students in Japan. And that
Wow.
makes me so happy that, just how music and poems, how everything goes out into the world.
big in
Yeah.
Japan.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Long
Yeah.
ago, Peter.
Yeah, that was a while back.
Yeah.
And then we briefly met just once in Austin.
At a taco place.
As
Right.
well, yes. I mean,
A taco place. Yeah.
that's the place that you meet in Austin.
Mm-hmm.
Who's on your coffee mug?
On my coffee mug is Dominican University, which is a really nice university in Chicago. And they just
yeah.
get this big, nice round coffee mug when I was there.
All right.
It's an old Catholic university, gorgeous campus, beautiful people. Yeah, one of the many places I feel privileged to have visited, as you feel to your venues. Don't you
Yeah.
feel attached to you feel attached to your venues. as they
Oh,
used to provide.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
And the sound guy at each venue and the,
Oh, yeah.
Like the
Right.
promoters and, eventually, like every folk venue eventually shuts down because, nobody is foolish enough to take over a folk venue. People are foolish enough to begin them.
Uh,
Some of them grow into institutions, and those are carried forward by the next generation. But your basic sort of venue,
right.
it's unlikely that someone is that foolish as to try to fail to make a living in the same space. And so when they shut down, then you feel that little absence in your life. But luckily, there's always a young person who is foolish enough to open a different folk venue.
Right. Right. Yeah. No, that's true. And I'm feeling that about coffee shops in our city because suddenly we have like a coffee shop on every corner. And I'm thinking, this was never the way. We used to have 3 coffee shops in the whole city and
Right.
every single block. And how do they even make it? Yeah.
Well, I mean, some of it is that, I think I'm old enough to remember when coffee was a quarter, you know,
Right.
and
Or a
now
dime
it's
or something. Yeah.
right. And now, like, yeah, it's very involved, but it's also very good. Those young kids and their caffeination technology is
Right.
something cold. Like I always know if I walk in and there's somebody whose gender I'm not quite able to place, and they have a lot of tats and like a little bit of mustache. I always think this is going to be an immensely severe jolt of caffeine.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there you
So
are, Jack, in coffee heaven.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
yes,
they're very small, and they're still a euro. So
Yeah.
are
yeah,
they?
yeah.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I think of this all. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Just it was Muslim holy men, right? And their goats. There were also goat herds, and the goats would eat the bean off the cherry off of this one particular bush and get frisky. So then they made it
Allegedly,
with it.
this is the
Yep,
romantic story. Yeah, yeah.
exactly. And then they steeped it into a tea, and then the Italians were like, what I do?
You might be missing a few bits in the story there, but
Yeah. Oh, I'm certainly missing. Uh, should I just dive in and begin asking Naomi Shehab Nye questions?
please.
Naomi, are you all right with that?
Sure. Yeah.
So I wanted to, I wanted to start with this. Uh, the old, well, Yeats said that Yeats quote, and I have it stuck up on one of my social media pages. It's so very important to me. Yeats said, "We make of the quarrel with others rhetoric, and of the quarrel with ourselves poetry."
Mm.
And I try to just keep that thought in mind. What I want to ask you, Naomi, is, I know that you have an Instagram page, and I know that you, to some extent, have joined this torrent of communication that has bloomed over the past, 10 years. And it seems to me that the very first thing that comes of all that is we all start yelling at each other and arguing with each other. It seems not that we have all become more argumentative by nature. It's just that we've been given an opportunity to yell at each other from inside the bubble of not our car, but now our house, the computer. Like we're inside this little bubble where if you say something nasty to someone, you won't see their face flinch, right?
Right.
So I've I have an instinct that our job as artists, mine as a songwriter and yours as a poet, is to go there, right? To where this hurt is all happening. But my fear is that whatever art I can bring to it just evaporates, and I immediately start the rhetoric instead of the poetry. So I guess the question is, do you have that same worry that that poetry itself evaporates in our new rhetorical world? And do you have a plan or an instinct or an urge to make it persevere? Or should we just retreat and make the poetry and hope it radiates outward?
Wow. That's a great question, Peter. Um, I feel quite ambivalent about social media uh,
Yes.
places. And when I started my Instagram page, it was because a young woman who was helping me get rid of all the imposters who were on Instagram in my name suggested to me that it would be easier to deal with all this if I truly had my own presence there. So I I started it very reluctantly. I said, "Well, I don't really want to do it." But she said, "But you need to have your presence there so you can say this is my page. These are not my pages." And she talked me into it. That was before Instagram would automatically go to Facebook, where it was
Right, right.
the same posting. So Facebook, I got onto only so I could follow the young girl, Jenna Jihad Ayad, whom I ended up writing an entire book called The Tiny Journalist. But because was tiny or is the tiny journalist. And so I wanted to be able to follow her and see what she was posting. So I had to join it to follow her. So I was a very reluctant, signer on. And I never felt that I wanted to engage in that public rhetoric battle, which I knew if I were posting anything about the Middle East, it would be, you know, an instant argument.
Yeah.
And so, the way I've used Instagram is just as kind of like a friendly little handkerchief tucked in my pocket, like this owl statue that I found in the forest in Germany when I'm taking a hike. Nobody's going to say anything mean to that owl. So,
Right.
posting little things with which no one has any argument, hopefully, but also little things that feel poetic to me, but I'm not
Mhm.
particularly going to write about them. But I just love them upon encounter. And so that's how I've used those sites. Occasionally, I don't really read them or go look at a lot of things. Although I have clicked in to follow a lot of people on Instagram. And, if I'm sitting in an airport, I will fan through and look at pictures and it feels companionable. But I've never had a desire, as a poet or as just a human being to get into some argument with someone about anything on there. So to me, poetry is still serving the main function of that dialogue with oneself, that
Right.
con- all the conflicts with oneself. And I love a William Goyen quote. He was a Texas story writer and novelist who said, where do my stories begin? They always start with trouble. You don't think they start with peace, do you?" And I heard him say that when I was in my 20s, and it really had an effect on me because I thought, well, most people have some kind of trouble of some
Yeah.
sort at any given moment, or something in the world that's troubling them, even if it's not their own trouble. So that means you always have a place to begin. Um, it doesn't have to be your own trouble, however. So that would be a little oppositional to Yeats. Could be like just a trouble in society or,
Right.
you know, I, I feel, one thing I say with kids now, since everybody's texting, is that you're all writers. Obviously, you're writing all day, every day. No
Right.
one tell me you're not a writer. And this is just a slower kind of writing and a writing that may invite more layers to be present for you. But you're in practice because you're texting now. We didn't used to do that all the time. We didn't used to receive messages, any hour of the day. Um,
Right.
in my whole childhood, like, how many messages did I ever get from anyone other
That's
than
a good point.
a direct conversation or the rare letter you would receive as a child from your grandmother or something? But,
Right.
yeah, when you think about what we are asked to respond to now, which is all these conversations, disembodied conversations from everywhere. I mean, that to me seems like enough to deal with versus having a conflict with someone on Facebook about
Ri-
any, yeah. And,
Right.
and so I don't know. I think you just have to sift and weigh it for yourself. What
Hmm.
going to be the most meaningful venue for expression?
Yeah.
Um, for you, songs, for me, poems. But I think that kids do have a hunger for the slowness and the thoughtfulness of poetry. And I think they're seeing it as a more enduring place now, since a poem on the page seems to last longer um, than, a text or a posting. Um,
Yes.
I have 7 letters I have to answer today for the Academy of American Poets. They have this Dear Poet project where they post the students' letters and your response. And I mean, these kids are talking about something I wrote 33 years ago. And so I have to kind of conjure up, who was I when I wrote that? What was
Right.
I thinking? They're acting like I wrote it yesterday, which is so sweet. But you realize
Right.
that poetry, which we thought of maybe sometimes as a disappearing medium, is maybe more rooted now, more anchored. If it's in a book, if it's on a page, I don't know.
Right. That's so. This leads me to wonder what is your primary point of contact with your audience? Because you're a very friendly poet on the page, right?
Yeah. Well,
Like,
I hope so.
well, right. Well, it definitely comes across. Like there are times, there are poets where you read them and well, there are poets that you read them and you kind of feel a little startled and like, there's an agenda here, or there's something intentionally obtuse, or maybe they're just talking in a rarefied way and it's a little over my head. And then I feel like your poetry it has all of that sort of depth, and you can get places with it, but it feels so conversational, so oriented towards um, you know, friendliness and direct address to a reader. But how did you cultivate that? Like in my case, I see them 100 nights a year. I see them and I say something funny and they laugh. And
Right.
on a good day, I think, oh, I made people laugh, which is one of the great pleasures in life. And on a bad day, I think I'm funny, and on, right? Like I see them. And so I have this ongoing, even though they're different people, I'm just like, oh, hi, you again. I can't
Yeah.
wait to tell you these things I've been thinking, right?
Right.
But how often do you do a live reading? And is that where you get that reader oriented thing,
Yeah.
or?
Oh, well, I do readings all the time, and I've
Oh,
been working in schools and communities and museums and public venues for 50 years, Peter. So
hmm,
I'm out there for a long time, and I never had a sense of hiddenness about not wanting to share or speak out. Um, so I would say what you're describing, that interaction with your audience, where
hmm,
build a relationship with other humans. And they don't have to be people they don't have to be people you're ever going to see again. And they don't have to be people who necessarily love you. Because I really have always liked the challenge of entering a classroom where the kids are
yeah,
looking very reluctant, like, who is this person? Why do we have to listen? We don't want to do this. And then by the end of the classroom, having some guy over there crying, some person over here so wanting to share, everybody happier. That to me is the real joy of, like working with poems. And when I worked in schools, um, primarily I wouldn't work with my own poetry. I would work with other people's. And also in the early days, I used a lot of lyrics from songwriters I love. So there was that link, like I would write stanzas of a song by Joni Mitchell or Bruce Springsteen or somebody I was listening to on the board, and we would just talk about that as a poem. And we would always talk around other people's texts. And if the kids said to me, read us what you just wrote while we were writing, or read us a recent poem of yours, I would, of course. But the primary focus was not my poetry. However, giving poetry readings for so many years, that would be primarily mine. So I do have a sense of, audience exchange. I really care about audiences. I just went to an event over in Roanoke, Virginia, where I honestly felt about 5 minutes in, like, this is a love cult. I am with the most loving educators of my entire life. Who are these people? I didn't know any of. Oh, I knew two of them or three of them, but the rest were all new to me. So I thought, who are they? I mean, how are they connected? And it turned out it was, a group of people who work in higher education, but the red is compassionate mindfulness in the classroom. So you can imagine how warm and affectionate they were to poetry. But for me, because I worked with kids, it was always important to be understood. I wasn't there to perplex people. I'm not interested in conundrums. I love mystery, and I like it when something seems a little mysterious in a poem and kids will say, well, I went here with it, or I thought it was this. That's good, but I'm not there to like baffle them. That would
Right.
not interest me at all because there's so much, in the world that baffles all of us. Why would we want to pass that on? So when kids say, your poems they function in an understandable way, that makes me happy. I want them to do that, but I also hope they'll spark, possibly a new connection, a new thought. Um, I don't want them to just, be too obvious. But you mentioned like a conversational vernacular. I
Yeah.
think early on, I was so curious about how to write poems that felt as comfortable as a lunchtime conversation between friends. And since I was eating in school cafeterias for all those early years of my life, um, I would hear how kids talk to one another and just that flow, that back and forth, that easiness. And I wanted a poem to be able to hold, both a pacing, which felt like you were having a conversation with yourself or with the world, something in the world, or with a problem, whatever it was about, um, with a thought. So I would really practice like reading out loud and taking out words that felt ornate or bulky or ridiculous, words you would never say in conversation. Well, I don't want those words in a poem either. So, and I feel that about your songs. Your songs invite people in instantly. And I think that to have that accessible, it's like you're on this avenue that's open. Um, and there aren't any roadblocks, detours. We're we've all been joking. We live in the inner city downtown in an old historic neighborhood, and everybody who lives downtown has been complaining for the last 5 years about how many streets are blocked off downtown. It's really hard to go anywhere. And, every time a new street gets opened or reopened for 4 minutes, people cheer and we want to hold a festival, for a street that reopened. But I feel that way about text too. You want the text to be open. You want to be able to flow through that line to the next line. What's coming next? How do I get there? You don't want to be stumped and thrown off a detour on a one-way street going the wrong direction. And for a lot of kids, the kids who often write to me, I feel that that was a preconception they came to art with. It's there to
Yeah.
confound us. We're not smart enough. We have to work so hard to get anything out of this. Um, so, I don't know. Does that answer a little bit?
I think it does.
Yeah.
It also,
Audience
it
is mattering. It matters.
absolutely. And I had the great pleasure once I was touring with another songwriter, Jeff Folkoff, and then he's friends with Chris Dombrowski, who's a Michigan and Montana poet. And we had a sort of a game where Jeff and I would bounce songs back and forth, and then one of us would pretend to not be able to think of another song, which, you know,
Yeah.
And at that point, you would call a Dombrowski and he would just get up and read the audience a poem.
Wow.
And crucially, then he would just go away and we'd keep singing songs and telling jokes. And then we'd bring him back up. And he sold, like, he happened to have brought, I think, like 11 or 14 books of poems. And he sold them all over the merch page. People bought them, which is a big day. Like the publisher must have seen that and been like, what's your secret?
That's
And
so sweet. Poets have such small dreams.
well, so here was the thing, like, well, one, yeah, it set him up for this beautiful joke because we dropped him off the next day at a Greyhound station. And like, he pulls these crumpled $20 bills out of his pocket. And as he's paying for his ticket, he turns to me and he goes, poetry money, cleanest money on earth, you know? Um,
I
but
don't like that.
I know, but the thing that I thought of the next day was this, like, I bet many of the adults in that room thought to themselves, oh, I never knew I liked poetry, because our introduction to poetry seems directly calculated to make us hate poetry. Like, a teacher makes you get up and read, read Robert Frost in front of the classroom out loud. And then the teacher like turns to you and says, so what do you think he meant? And, you're like 11 and you're like, what? Like, he just said it better than you can say it, let alone,
Yeah.
And so are you still the young people's poet laureate, or
No,
your
that
turn?
is it. But yeah, someone else's.
Who is that? Do you,
Um, I should be able to tell you off the top of my head, but I
couple
can't.
of successions?
Yeah. No, it's just one succession. They
Oh, okay.
extended my term by a year because of COVID and because I had to do so many events by Zoom. But what you just said, I'll think of her name in a minute. She's wonderful. I think it's Elizabeth Acevedo. Um, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's Elizabeth. But Charles Simic was a great poet. He lived in New Hampshire, who just died, and he was
Yes.
a Serbian poet. And he said, it's the sad, it's the why did people want to paraphrase poetry in duller language? And that's what teachers were asking us to do all those years when they said, what does this poem really mean? That was such
Right.
a terrible question. What they could have been asking, and what, I always encourage teachers to ask is, do you like anything in this poem? What do you like? How is the poet doing that? Does it remind you of anything in your own experience? Is there something that perplexes you? What is it? Why? What images do you see in your mind? The kinds of questions that are more open ended and that you could have 25 different answers for, and nobody would be wrong. I think
Yeah.
that is, nobody comes out of a ballet and says, what did that really mean? And
Right.
no one listens to jazz. I love jazz. I listen to it every day. Nobody says, what did that really mean? What was he trying to say?
Yeah.
You talk about those things sometimes, but it's not like you have to know that or have a sense about that to love it,
Yeah.
to appreciate it.
Yeah.
Uh,
Absolutely.
but
I,
poetry received a particular disservice in the world of education. Like, it was put on the guillotine for some
oh,
reason, because it was so short that people thought, okay, this is one art form I can wrestle to the ground and figure it out. And I've never said this before or thought it in quite this way. So you two are very inspiring. But I just think that, you know, it's weird that that happened to
right.
poetry. And I'm writing a book of poems right now about my mom, who died on Thanksgiving in 2021. And my mom was a very interesting, cultured, artistic person, had been to art school, just had an incredible life and experience, and a complicated person too. And um, but one thing I'm thanking her for in one poem um, is how she would take us to the St. Louis Art Museum every Sunday afternoon for my entire childhood till I was 14 and we left there. And she would have us look at art, but she would just say things like, what do you like? What do you see? What does this say to you? Her questions were so open ended. Or she would say, I particularly love this Monet. Do you? And if I said, no, doesn't do much for me, she would say, well, let's walk around till we find something you love. It was just like this person who loved art, wanted to be in the presence of art, and just wanted us to feel engaged with it too. We also would attend every lecture that was available, even if it was on a topic we weren't very interested in. And, she knew that art could enrich a life, but just by being with it.
Right. Right. Like there's
Early-
the social scientists have figured out that if there are books in your house, you will have X outcomes in your life. And
Oh,
apparently you don't necessarily need to even read the books. Like it's just that the books be around you and people read the books and talk to you, and then that will lure you in. And the same with art. Like I think art in some ways it gets segregated off and made special from the rest of things, when really it's just kind of another great nutrient. Like you should have
right,
a child growing up should just have art
right.
around them
Be
in the way
around,
that,
right.
yeah, in the way that a
Be
child should have
around different kinds of music, be around, yeah,
a dog, a cat,
yes,
a
yeah.
garden. Like, also, I can't help, I had never had this thought before, but I think you are correct. I think that it is because poetry is sort of at its best, it's beautiful and it calls us to, well, that's your quote. It calls us to pause. Poetry calls us to pause, but it does so by being a small and unassuming, beautiful thing like a leaf.
Right.
And so they thought that they could wrestle it to the ground. It's like they thought that among all the arts, maybe poetry was like the baby deer, and they could separate it from the deer. Hurry.
Yeah.
And
Right.
that backfired upon
That's
them.
something we can be sure about. Right. Yeah.
Exactly. And it backfires because, of course, the wolves will catch and kill the baby deer, but that's a poem. It just remains a poem. You can't
Right.
actually ever get at it, and then the wolves themselves go off and become poems. And, the forest, achieves its balance because the wolves have thinned the herd, and then the rivers flow cleaner because the wolves have been reintroduced, and that's a poem. And then we're talking about it over Zoom, and there's even a poem somewhere for Zoom. Although I wonder,
I love Zoom. I think Zoom is great. I mean, look at us.
yes,
Yeah. Right.
yeah,
Given us so many gifts. Yeah.
I agree. I
Yeah.
agree. Especially, I don't know if you saw, but there was a lawyer who logged into court on a Zoom thing, but he had a filter on that his daughter had, put on the computer or something, so that he appeared as though he were a cat.
I saw that.
Wasn't
I
that
did see
great?
that.
And
Yeah.
my favorite is that at one point he said, I'm not a cat. And adorably, you have this little cute cat cartoon saying, I'm not a cat. And then oh,
I can't imagine how that case came out. Could they
I
even
know.
find it for 1 minute? I think innocent, whatever it was, you're innocent.
You're innocent. I'm a
Yeah,
cat.
total innocent. Right.
Oh,
But all connection too, Peter. And that sense of connection among the arts, and how, some image you saw, some painting you saw as a child comes back to you as an adult, or you see it again in a different light, or you read again things you loved as a child. And there's this connection that, like, ties together the time of your own life and of, people in the world. It's an amazing thing.
yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like in some ways, right. It's like it it's like yeah, it's connective tissue, right? It's
It is.
honestly, it's religion in the language sense of religion, because it took me a long time to realize that religion and ligament kind of come from the same root, ligos,
Oh,
to bind something to something else. Like
I
someone
didn't know
pointed,
that.
I didn't for a long time, I did not. And I think I ran across it somewhere and I felt like a nickel had dropped into the slot in my brain, like religion and ligaments. Like we need to be tied together. I guess here's just a blunt question that we can't know the answer to. Do you think poetry connects us to each other? Or do you think that it reminds us that we are connected? Those are two different things.
Both, but I think both. I think it does both. It connects us newly, afresh, and to each other, but also to the parts of ourselves that we may need at any given moment. But also we are already connected, and it just reminds us. But I mean, I think the connections can be new,
Mhm.
um, or they can be, like an acknowledgement of something that was there. Both. I would think both.
Gotcha.
What do you think?
I I mean, I don't know. I more and more I'm beginning to suspect that I'm awfully self-centered and awfully anthropocentric. Here, the bowerbird that makes the great big, bower, like all the twigs,
Yeah.
sort of like a little temple to attract a mate, right? And then there are those fish that make those little mandalas, like in the sand. I like, waving sand. Yeah,
I don't know about that.
yeah, or just on a much, a spring peeper just makes a very loud sound that is essentially like, putting on an Al Green record. Like, hey, come here, let us mate and create more spring peepers. Um, I think that is art too. I don't have a leg to stand on because, of course, I don't know what a spring peeper or a fish or a bird is thinking. But I think I don't think art is particular to humans.
Right.
I don't even think it's necessarily particular to animals, to things with brains, right? Like, um, well, here again, it seems like they're beginning to understand that the whole of a forest, like if you burn a tree, there are these mycological, these fungal connections that sort of go through the ground and et cetera. And a tree all the way on the other side of the forest will react
Right.
to the tree being burned, right? That like, the internet is by no means an innovation at all. We're actually late to the game of being connected, or maybe we separated to reconnect. So this is all, boy, it seems that I did not just take a psilocybin mushroom like while nobody was looking in the middle of this conversation, but I think that well, here, one of your most famous poems is Kindness. That's people know that poem. eh, You know,
Yeah.
it's your signature poems. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, Kindness. So
Yeah.
I mean, Chekhov. Chekhov said art should prepare us for tenderness, which I love. I love like
Yeah.
very short, insightful formulations like that.
Yeah.
I think he's right. I think you agree. I think art should prepare us for tenderness, but the tenderness itself, again, that's not special to people. But everything is somewhat tender, at least with its own firstborn, unless it's an octopus. You know,
Are they
and
mean their children?
no, they just have no culture. This is if they the a baby octopus just is born and goes away and becomes they're a culture of one. Like they don't. Yeah,
Arms, but a culture of one.
right. Like what is their
Yeah.
poetry like? So I guess my question, I keep coming around to this question, like, and you're going to keep saying both. Is it the art that steers us towards the tenderness, or is it the art that provokes the tenderness? Does art sort of spark a fire and a warmth of tenderness, or does it make us aware of what was already there? And I suspect you're going to say both. Yes. Yeah.
You're
You're,
right. You're
you're
right.
going to say both. And then
Sure.
I have a technical question for you.
Yeah.
Did you, as a very young person, always have this sort of memory for quotes and sounds? Like,
I was tuned into language from a very early age. And yes, so I did. And I was lucky to have, parents who were very articulate. And my father told us stories. My mother read poems and sang to us at bedside, and then, had an interesting dialogue every minute of her life. Um, so yes, I was surrounded by language as a young child, but I also felt when I heard the poems of Emily Dickinson at the age of 3, I felt uh, that's where I want to be. I want to
really?
be, yes, but I'm sure I didn't even know the word poem yet, but I felt like what was happening in those lines when my mother would read a Dickinson poem at bedtime, and I knew that if I said, "Read it again," she would. Um, I felt so transported by that kind of language use that I remember physically standing, uh, in the hallway outside my own room before bedtime thinking, uh, "That's that's where I wanna be. I don't wanna go to bed, but I wanna hear those lines. I want to
Yeah.
those lines." And
Yeah.
I knew there was something about the language, which just to me, it was like a held note. Like when, later as a child, I would play in a youth symphony, and I loved the tuning moment, where everyone was tuning up. I just
Right.
loved hearing the A and hearing it go around the whole orchestra, and that held note.
Yeah.
Like the held silence after you heard a poem, you were just floating on the held note. And so this goes on, decades. And I think when I wrote the book Voices in the Air, which was sort of calling forth voices that had spoken to me either from the page or in real life in some way, or somebody's email or a random comment on a Zoom. Um, but the poems all had this kind of sense of voices being out there. Uh,
Yeah.
that was just reconnecting to that impulse as a child, that
Yeah.
the language was out there. Of course, I wouldn't have known then that Emily Dickinson had died, so long before. I wouldn't have known where was she, anything about her story, but just hearing the language, um, it
Hmm.
was great.
Right.
By the way, have you watched Dickinson on TV, on Apple TV, either of
I
you?
have not. Should I?
Well, yes, I think, and I think my husband thinks too, we think it's the best thing that's ever been on TV. And we have not met many people who have watched it, which seems uh, outrageous to me because it is so great. And if you are a longtime reader of Emily Dickinson, or if you've never even heard of her, I think you would be just mesmerized by this 3-season TV series.
All
It's
right.
called, yeah,
I'm in. We're looking
yeah,
for
you
something.
have to watch it. Watch it while
We
you watch.
we have a young one at home. We got an 18 months old, and like,
Wow,
yeah. And uh
congratulations.
thank you. And Jack has a 9 month old. So we're
Oh,
both
wow.
in dereliction of duty right now to even be doing this. But as a result, like, when we finally get the little incontinent sociopath to bed, um, we have all these plans of what we're going to clean, but really what all we have the bandwidth for is to like take an ibuprofen and rub lotion on feet and lie on the couch
Right.
and watch a
And
thing.
watch something. Right.
That's all
Well,
we got.
the Dickinson segments are short. They're only 30 minutes, but it will
Perfect.
take you into another time in history. And I think every actor is incredible. And I just think it's a brilliant piece of art. And the woman who wrote it, uh, another name that's flying out of my head at this moment, she is primarily a playwright. And I think she's from your part of the country, Peter. So
Mm.
it may be somebody whose plays you've seen. But yeah, check it out.
Is it Sarah Rule? Because if it's
No, it's not Sarah Ruth.
okay, good. I want to double back to a few things. There's that famous Emily Dickinson quote, "When I feel as though the top of my head has been taken off, that is poetry." And it sounds like you were 3 years old feeling
Yeah.
that way. You
I
were
did
like,
feel that at 3 years old. I felt like
right?
the top of my head had removed and my body was floating and I wanted to stay there in that float.
Totally. Totally.
But I
Also,
actually don't think that such a dramatic response is necessary for a poem to be appreciated. I think a poem may also be appreciated in a calmer, you know, quieter way. It doesn't have to be a huge melodrama. And
right.
yeah, I know one thing I was going to say earlier that I really feel about something like poetry, but maybe I feel this about all arts, that expertise is not required, but exposure and enthusiasm are.
Yes.
So three
Yes.
three words starting with E, but one, you don't have to be an expert on something to appreciate it or be changed by it.
100%. There's a guy came over to my house because we heat with wood pellets, and the pellets, there was something had gone wrong with the pellets though. And he was a kid, he's maybe, 20, 22 years old. And as it happens, we have three Ansel Adams prints, like 8x10 that Ansel Adams himself made in a dark room. Like,
Oh, nice.
it's really nice. It's one of the few. My wife's grandmother bought them when that was a thing you could do, and they happen to be, and we have them on the wall, and like, that's really cool, and
Very,
it's etc.
yeah.
But he like went right up to them, and he's like, "Oh man, look at that! I just want to be where that. I just want to be where." Oh, that makes me think of this and that and the other. And I realized that, and I said, these are Ansel Adams. I kind of had my moment of being an
Yeah.
artistic and cultured person. And he was like, I don't know who that is, but man, I just really like, like,
Wow, he
I
didn't know who that was. Amazing.
nope, he had never
That's
heard of Ansel.
he
Right.
felt them. Yeah.
Exactly. Like he gave me an education in what is actually going on here. Like
Yeah.
in some ways, who cares who Ansel Adams is? It's not that like, it's even if all Ansel Adams wanted to do was be a famous photographer, and I doubt that's what he wanted to do. But let's say that's the only thing that was in his mind. Let's say Ansel Adams was an awful, egotistical guy who, patronized everyone around him and was single-mindedly focused on being famous and talked tirelessly about himself. Even that doesn't matter. The photographs are great, and they make
Right.
this think a thing. Like I
It's
don't
beautiful.
matter. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I
You
love
can
that. I
oh,
love that.
now
May I
here's a
may I counter with one little story
yeah, of
that
course.
just happened about it's about like the presence of art. So I started taking our grandson, who is now 7, but when he was 3, I started taking him to one of my favorite museums in our city. And he really loved this particular Georgia O'Keeffe painting that was a big orange sky, and it was a big Georgia O'Keeffe, and it was just a beautiful, like a horizon and a big orange sunset. And so we went to that museum, every month or so, and he walked in one day, and there was another. It amazed me that he would remember as a 3-year-old, like, this was not here, or why did they change that? But he saw there was another Georgia O'Keeffe where this other one had been,
Yeah.
and he stalked up to the guard, the docent who was standing there, and said, "Where did you put the Georgia O'Keeffe with the orange sky? This one is not as good." And I'm shocked that he even acknowledged that this was another Georgia O'Keeffe.
Right,
He
right.
had time to tell him that yet. And I thought,
Right.
remembering her name from a month ago and he's 3 years old. Amazing. And
And
I completely agreed with him that the other painting was much more compelling because it used to take like all the attention of that room toward that painting. And now it was just like a more nondescript O'Keeffe. But he
right.
knew it was her from the way. And since then, he always wants to go and check on the Georgia O'Keeffe spot in the museum, but he also now has, relationships with all these other pieces of art there. And he doesn't forget. He's like imprinted by having heard an artist's name once or hearing what the title of a painting was once. I mean, he has just revived my belief in that child mind that is so absorbent and so
Yeah.
curious. And,
Yes.
he's never asked me any details about Georgia O'Keeffe, but he has very strong opinions about her.
Well, all that stuff comes later, I feel like.
Right.
Like, that's my favorite thing about watching, I mean, it's a real privilege to watch a baby put together a human self, like
Yeah.
there's,
So
right. And like what I keep noticing over and over is that they get all the sophisticated part and then they fill in the rudiments. Like later, there'll be the rudiments. Oh, George O'Keeffe, and then this school of things and etc. But like the getting it, like they can get it, as easily as we, or probably in some ways better than we. I wanted to, okay.
But also, Peter, what you say touches on, how poetry was often presented to classrooms through a list of definitions first. No one ever fell in love with poetry because of the word alliteration. I mean, that's
Yes.
you don't teach someone the definitions first. It's like teaching someone, just describing a spice, but they've never tasted it. So without kids falling in love with poetry, why would they care about the definition?
Right.
So what you've just said is so crucial to the ways that we share art and,
Right.
acknowledge that some other person, I think Jack Kerouac used to say, my brain is trying to connect to that part of your brain that will feel the energy in this story or the joy in this characterization. But, let's not analyze this whole thing right now. Let's just
Absolutely.
be in the story.
Yeah, I agree. Okay. Emily Dickinson. I live somewhat near. She lived in Amherst, and I live a few towns away.
So. Yeah,
And
she's a girl there.
have you been? They have the house, and then they have the room where she wrote the poems, and they have a thing that it's for kids, but frankly, it's for me too, where they have the drafts, and so you have her poem on the wall, but these little spinning things where you can insert the words that she tried.
Oh,
Like
wow.
you just spin the thing. It's really
I have been to the house, but it was years ago in a transition moment for the house. They were doing some rehab on the construction. And so we spent a lot of time in Austin Dickinson's house, her brother.
right.
They only gave us like a tiny bit of time, and there were no displays in her house. It was like vacant, empty, although they showed us that's her room, that's the window.
Right.
But they didn't have anything like that. But that sounds fantastic.
It is. They've made it real good for
And
kids.
it's for kids or for adults to see the possibilities.
Yes.
She faced as well as a computer user faces. No difference.
Right. Exactly.
No difference at all.
So this, I have a sort of a doubling back question. So I love Emily Dickinson's poetry. And part of what I love about it is it's super weird. Like they're these small little poems.
Yeah.
And like,
Huge.
yeah. And yeah. And like you see, there's something sort of ethereal, and it feels like you're you're tuning into to a radio signal, or that she was tuning into a radio signal from another dimension. Like they're just very strange, sort of hair-raisingly strange. And I love that about her. I also lived for a brief amount of time in a town called Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin. There's a tiny little folk club there called the Cafe Carp. And they're dear friends of mine. There was a poet named Lorine Niedecker who
Oh,
lived.
I love Lorine Niedecker.
I love her too. So she lived in that town out in this swampy little sort of, bayou where on the, they call it Black Hawk Island. And there's a little cabin there. You can still walk out to it, the cabin that she lived in.
Wow.
And, she walked to her job at the hospital, and she lived in poverty and obscurity.
Right.
I read, so I was living in the town for a little while, walking out to the cabin, getting some writing done. And I happened, a neighbor just dropped off a biography of Lorine Niedecker. So I'm like in the town reading about the poet and there's murals nowadays. There's a couple of murals of the poetry on, the drugstore downtown. But I read that, what's his name? William Carlos Williams, knew about her, and that the sort of circle of poets in the 1940s and 50s, when Lorine Niedecker was putting out her poetry, they referred to her as the Emily Dickinson of the Midwest. And I was irritated because Lorine's poetry is a lot of things, but it doesn't seem to me much like Emily Dickinson's at all. Like she's
Right.
very blunt and very direct and
Right.
very like she has that poem, Poet's Work. Grandfather advised me, learn a trade. I learned to sit at a desk and condense. No layoff from this condensery.
Fantastic. I love that. And
Yeah,
I
like
love her.
I love her too. Or again, there's a poem where she talks about how the cold moused in. And she's talking about, they put there used to be a wood stove. And so they put the tin lid of a pan over that, but the cold still mouses its way in. That's exactly the right verb, is to use the noun mouse as a verb. But my point is, her poetry to me looks like a ball peen hammer. Like she's trying to
Right.
say super direct, blunt things. And Emily Dickinson is almost the opposite poet. So all this was to get around to a point, which is that poetry for, I don't know, much of the recent past appears to have been like the purview of a select group of men who decided what went in journals, and probably also came up with the methodology of teaching poetry and et cetera. And, I think that they probably called Lorine Niedecker the Emily Dickinson of the Midwest because they couldn't think of any other female poet to whom to compare her. Am I being too harsh?
No, and I think it's very reductive when you have to say one person is like another person. Why
Right.
can't they be themselves? And it's kind of insulting to both of them. They were both so original. And I think probably it's just because Lorine's poems were so short, and they do contain very,
That's
distinctive
fair.
images, which
Yeah.
Emily's poems do too. And you'll love, if you watch the Dickinson series, each segment has a line from a poem as its title. And
Oh,
really,
wow.
they really work with that. It's gorgeous. But Lorraine's poems were so physical, tangible, palpable. I agree with you. I think Emily's are a little more ethereal and mental, intellectual.
Yeah.
Um, I feel that Niedecker is one of the most undersung poets of the whole 20th century. And I know, other poets have felt that way as well. I have never seen a biography of her. So your mention of that existence makes me want to go searching for it now. I would love to read more about her life.
I'll hit
But
you up. I forget who wrote it, but I think it's a local Fort Atkinson person that wrote it.
Well,
But I would say,
if you find out who it is, I would like to know.
I know just who
But
to call.
but I feel as if she was such an original that she doesn't need to be, linked to anyone else to have the dignity of her own poems. And I loved her. I mean, I could connect her to Kate Barnes of Maine in some ways because Kate was also living on a farm, carrying a bucket, wearing muddy boots, doing hard work. But still their poems were so different and um
Right.
no need to I would guess though that Kate liked her poems. I don't know that for sure, but I
I
would
would
think
imagine.
the thing. And um it's such a joy though to be able to share people like her or people like William Stafford, my lifetime mentor. Are you related to him, Jack?
No, no.
Well, he's
Not
one of the, guiding light voices for me since I was 17 years old. And I just think it's so important to keep mentioning him because, he died more than 20 years ago and people don't mention him enough now. And he was a crucial 20th century American voice. I'm sure
yeah.
he also liked Niedecker. I could probably find that out from his son. But anyway, so many people to cherish. And when we find someone like Lorine, or, what a joy that Emily became such a household word. I mean, her
Right.
poem extremely popular in the Middle East. And when I was doing one of my first Zooms that I ever did with students and scholars in Iraq, and I asked them, "How did you get through all these horrible years of war? What helped you? What sustained you?" One professor jumped up and said, "Emily Dickinson, we've been translating her poems." And I thought, wow. And here she was, a person who kept them in her drawer. And now all these people in Baghdad are in love with her poems. I love this.
Right.
It's
What are
it's
the odds?
yeah, what are the odds?
Oh,
And it's
right.
never too late to keep championing others. I mean, I feel that about songwriters too, don't you? When you hear somebody
Oh,
who
yeah.
never got enough praise and never comment, you want to sing their song or talk about them.
Yeah. My friend, uh, the songwriter Chris Delmhorst, made this beautiful record. I guess this would be 10, 12, 15 years ago now, but she made this beautiful record called Strange Conversation, where she made poems into songs. And she didn't, just take poems and set them to music. She, read the poems and really tried to sort of digest them and write a song, sometimes in response to, and sometimes embellishing on or distilling a part of or expanding on a part of. It's an incredible record.
Can you
It's
say her name again?
Chris Delmhorst, Delmhorst, and Chris is spelled Kris.
Like,
And I remember, I would have been that length of time ago, I would have been probably pushing 40 and I put out, I don't know, 8 or 10 records. And I remember thinking, my God, this one has to see the light of day. This record has to see the light of day. Like this is, none of us are famous, but this has got to be the one that breaks through for her. And, what happened was what always happens when we put out a record. Like our audience, thank God we even have an audience. Our audience really likes it. And then maybe it gets played on a few college and folk radio stations and a few more people dig it and it's on to the next thing. Like almost all art just sort of sinks in its moment. It sinks like a pebble and there are a few ripples, whatever, and yet I feel like those songs are going to stick around and the act of doing that does reverberate and stick around. Like, nothing will humble you more than, well, let's go back to that Lorine Niedecker poem, No Layoff from This Condensery. What she's saying is, once you dedicate your life to making these beautiful things that do not matter, you're making these poems, no one can fire you. You're not going to make any money, but you cannot be fired.
I, you're
Like,
on the job. You
I mean,
are on the job. No days off.
Oh man. Well, my phone is dying. I I have maybe like 3 or 4 minutes left, and I could plug it in. But I also my wife's parents, I can hear them. They have walked in the door, and my son may or may not be napping, and I'm feeling more and more keenly the dereliction of duty here. So
Okay.
I feel like, God, do I have one last question? Yeah, I do. I do. Okay. Uh, Anais Nin said, when you make a world tolerable for yourself, you make a world tolerable for others. I have heard usually very accomplished songwriters, I have heard them bemoan how so many songwriters today are just engaged in therapy, right? They're
Mhm.
writing sort of confessional songs um, about their own pain. And I don't think that's the whole story. I think that it is perhaps sometimes quite necessary that a young poet has pretensions of thinking of their own pain
Yeah.
as, as having been the only person, I bet, what is the question I'm asking? I think that in the end, it doesn't matter what vulnerability or pain you are talking about. But at some point, you have to be talking about your own in order to connect it to the pain and the poet and the suffering of others, right?
Yes.
That sort of connective tissue. And
Absolutely.
so I guess my question for you is, how much of your own anguish, okay, let's look at a poem of yours that most people who know who you are know, Kindness, right? It centers on somebody else's death that you encountered, right?
Right. Yeah.
As in and yet it also centers on sort of the vulnerability of travel and all of that.
Right.
How much of your own suffering are we privy to? Whether it's important that we know that or not. How much of your own pain goes into this?
Um, well, a portion of it. And, it is very, very helpful to have that place to channel some pain or to be able to look at it from a different angle, maybe. I would think, the pain may still be there, but you have a bigger view of it now. You see it a little differently. And I've surely thought of that poor Indian in the white poncho all
Yeah,
these years, like how his life was snuffed out and ours so easily could have been because we were all on the same bus. But,
right.
but, you know, that, uh, that sense of shared pain is definitely something that writing will, it will help you to write some of yours. And you may not want to reveal, all the parts of it, but I think sometimes just by looking at it from a different angle, and I've certainly been doing that lately a whole lot, um, will help you. And and also something written by someone else or even by yourself miraculously will come by back to help you. Like the kindness poem does come into my mind, even though I feel like I was almost a secretary for the poem taking dictation. Um, it comes back when I need it. The lines of it come straight into my mind like a dagger when I need it. And I don't feel like that's a conscious move I'm making. I feel like it's something unconscious. Those lines
Hmm.
are floating in there. They know when to rise to the top. Okay, these are needed now. And when you're working with, areas of trouble and pain and hardship and things you're, struggling to understand, uh, for me, coming at them from different angles and seeing them in different contexts may be what will help us find composure. And lately, you mentioned the words religion and ligament being linked. I have been so helped lately by compose and composure.
Oh, that's so good.
Yeah,
That's so good.
that's my ending. That's that's it.
Yeah. Mic drop. I
Yeah.
Got the
think that's
lyrics to the song there then.
Yeah,
compose and composure.
yeah. I mean,
Like-
it hit one day so hard and was such a life raft.
Oh
It's-
my God. Right.
Yeah.
Once you have
The
composure,
everyday-
all it means is that you're actually making it, you're actually creating.
Yeah.
Now you're creating. You have composure. You're at rest
Yeah.
and at one with all the things that are moving. Oh, that's so good.
There you go, Peter. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank
Using
you.
the song. No, we got to get a song out of this. So having such a great poet on here. If she
Oh,
didn't contribute some
we're gonna
lyrics, it would be.
Songs out of this interview.
Well, if you song on that one, I can't wait to hear it.
I believe me, I'm gonna that man, that was a large rock going into Lake Superior when you said
Yeah.
that. Oh, it was- sure.
Excellent. And I'm
All
so
right.
happy to know about the spinners with the variant words for Emily poem. I
Isn't
love
that-
I love
Oh.
visualizing that. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you for your time. Oh my God. And thank you, Jack, for having us. And we have to do this again, just to do this again.
Yeah, it was very fun. Thank
It
you.
really was.
But Jack, I want to interview you too next time.
Oh well, anytime I'm available.
Okay.
All right.
Honored.
You're
So
so
are you got to get back to your 9 months old. I got to get back to my 18 months old. And that's
engaged with little ones. Okay.
we will. All right.
Thank
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 so
you,
much.
Owen. Bye.
Now we got to do a song. Let's just stay on for 1 second, Peter. Just
Okay.
to
Oh, you guys are going to stay on.
yeah,
Okay.
we just have to
All right.
hammer out the song.
Bye, Naomi.
Bye. See you.
Bye. So, lived up to expectations. That was
Oh
wonderful.
my God.
Yeah,
She's Panic. She's so good.
it was great just listening to you, like sitting around the campfire, listening to you tell stories, and wow.
Like, oh,
So you're inspired.
yeah, there's a reason she makes the big bucks.
Yeah.
But, yeah. Oh God. I'm like, one day your kid turns to you and says, I want to be a poet. And you're like, okay, kid, go for it. Go for it. Be a good boy.
Yeah.
Well, what do we have anything that we have to cover? Or?
No, we'll just work on the song, just send it back and forth. And I've got the musicians here in Italy. We can turn it into a full-fledged beast for you.
I love it.
Yeah.
All right. So now I have to write a song that arises from that interview.
Yes.
Oh. All right.
All right.
All right. Thank you, Jack. Now I'm
Okay.
going to go into diaper.
Back down to earth.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye,
All right.
Peter.
My neighbor came to my door asking for a half a cup of sorrow so that we might come to know each other better. In the lull between the air raid sirens, and I asked her in 40, and we smiled there in the rubble of what used to be my home, and sang the only song that really stands up to the mess that men will make when they are finished being sweet and gentle boys, and then they rise up from the ashes of their innocence to break the world, and we sing, God is a comedian playing to an audience that is too afraid to laugh. God is a comedian playing to an audience that is too afraid to laugh. was a window to a basement shining. Green tornado skies down on a bunk bed and a bookshelf. And the girl who's down there hiding from her high school full of zombies, while her grandpa's on the back porch smoking weed and watching all the skinny squirrels that chase each other up and down the scraggy maples. And if he would only tell her of the lover that he jilted, then the two of them would realize they're mostly the same person and sing, God is a comedian, playing to an audience that is too afraid to laugh. God is a comedian, playing to an audience that is too afraid to laugh. So wretched that you sat there with your oatmeal and your coffee in a Starbucks and you cried alone in public, and then noticed every soul around you humming like an orchestra, just warming up. And then there was the hush before the first note. God is a comedian, playing to an audience that is too afraid to laugh. That is too afraid to laugh. God is a comedian. God is a comedian.
Thanks for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed the song and the episode. The song will be released next week. It will be available on all streaming platforms, but you can already pre-save. Please support the artists by following them on social media and adding the song to any playlists you have. This is a completely free show, and you've listened this far, so I'd really appreciate it if you could pay us back by clicking like and subscribe. And follow at Podsongs on social media platforms, or subscribe to the newsletter at podsongs.com for special updates. Or just tell the next person you see about this amazing show where musicians interview their idols and write a song about them. The songs are available for download from the Podsongs website as well, which pays a lot more than the 0.00 whatever we get from Spotify. You can also email me at jack@podsongs.com to give feedback, suggest an artist and guest combos you'd like to hear, or just say hello. We're a listener-supported show, and I'd love to hear from you. A final thanks to my researchers, Dori Verbo and Rosa Marino, my producer, Maurizio Sanicola of Goldmine Records, and musicians Massimino Vozza and Luigi Falcione. The next episode will be out soon. In the meantime, you can listen to more amazing episodes in the archives. Until then, have a great day.